Okay, here we go. What we will be discussing today is a topic which I'm sure we've all touched upon here and there, but due to some very recent publications, we're able to get to come to know a little bit more and a little bit more in detail, a little bit more clarify the issues regarding Roman Jerusalem, particularly Aelia Capitolina. So we're not going to change or revolutionize the way that we look at this time period, sandwiched between the Second Temple period and the Byzantine period, two of unquestionably the most, the most important periods of Jewish ancient history, both for Jewish and for all of Western culture and for this entire land, the Byzantine period being the most populous and the most densely populated until modern era. But still, the Roman period has a very interesting impact, and would like to explore that today. Now, I definitely, we recall the work of Yoram Safrir, who both in his book in 1984 in Hebrew in 1985, and in his work here, both editing and the articles that he wrote with this publication, definitely set things going. But in the last 20 years, there have been significant excavations, and these excavations have led to some new publications, and they can be found in these three books. The new edition of Ancient Jerusalem Revealed, which has an entire chapter. Roman Jerusalem, A New Old City. If you can't read it, it's Guy Stiebel. But most particularly is a book that was just recently published called Aelia Capitolina, Jerusalem in the Roman World. It is published in 2020 in the Inscription in this edition, which is what I read in the library before I figured out that I could download the PDFs online. It was given by Shlomit to the library in February 2020. So I doubt there were too many people that, like me, read through the book. And most of what we're going to speak today, at least, is going to come in through the perspective of Shlomit. Shlomit, to remind you, is responsible for the excavations between 2005 and 2009 of the entire plaza, the back of the Western Wall plaza. This was a salvage excavation in the preparation of the building of Beit HaLibah. This is what this is one of the concepts. I don't know if this was the final approved of Ada Karmi, who this is going to, it's going to be built. This is the plan. You're going to be able to stand on the roof. You see, this is the Gag Patuach Letzibur, and look over, but the people behind are kind of upset because it's going to block their view as well. So that's what's being constructed right now. But in preparation for that, they excavated the entire back and found some pretty significant finds regarding the Roman period, or what normally we call the late Roman period, particularly what we call here the Western Cardo. Due to her study with this, she expanded her studies and basically was able to find a theme throughout, affecting almost every different topic relating to Aelia Capitolina, and that is Roman Jerusalem. It's not only Aelia Capitolina, but as we're going to see today. So we don't start with Aelia Capitolina. We start with after the year 70, when the Roman legion remains in Jerusalem, as Josephus describes, and we're sort of at a loss here. And this is going to be true for most of what we're going to discuss with regard of the Roman period, the late Roman period, because as opposed to the Second Temple period before and the Byzantine period after, where we have just an overwhelming amount of both literary and archaeological information, with regard to the Roman period, we have a very limited amount of historical documentation, both literary and military or historical. Very few inscriptions. We have just a little bit more than 100 inscriptions, mostly in Latin. That's in contrast to about 800 inscriptions that we have from the Second Temple period and 400 in the Byzantine period in the city. So just to give you some proportion, we're really, and that gives a little bit of, that limits our ability to understand exactly what's happening. But from what we know basically the city is in ruins. We discussed a different time, we're not going to expand on it now, is in the outskirts of the city. We do have a Jewish town being built in this is in the area of Shuafat, which indicates that it's probably not a lone town. There probably were a number of villages that were surrounding the city, and that might reflect in one of the things that we see is that there are traditions of a Jewish community in the area. Shmuel Safrai in the Sefer Yerushalayim puts these together and tries to claim that there may have been a small Jewish community that tried to restore itself within the walls of Jerusalem. There are a few synagogues that are documented there, but it's very hard to place that within any type of realistic context. We're not really sure whether or not these are just the ideals or legends. Again, the story of Rabbi Akiva and the other rabbis walking and seeing the ruins, they don't talk about any type of rebuilt city. In the just only the ruins and the fox coming out of Temple Mount. So there must not have been, at least within that story, as historical as it could be, is not reflecting any type of rebuilt community there. But the Jews were in and out and going there, but that wouldn't be too uncommon. So that's regarding the city itself. But what about the Roman legion? So Josephus writes that Titus permitted the 10th legion to stay as a guard at Jerusalem, as opposed to being sent to the Euphrates, where they had been done before. So they were set at guard. But where? Where was the Roman legion camp? And this has been the topic of discussion for quite a long time, and we're going to see that in a moment. One of the early indicators that the Roman army actually sat here is inside of the courtyard of the Imperial Hotel. If you peek inside, and you can still do this today with groups, I wouldn't necessarily go in because it's quite disturbing to the people there, but if you're with a small group, you can go in, and there is a Roman, it looks like a milestone, but it's not, it's a monument, and this monument says the following. It is Marco Junio Maximo Legio Augustum Legionis Fratensis Antoninae Domite Sergius Strategarius. So you can see it's all in the beginning of the word, as we have in many Roman inscriptions. This is from Jerome Murphy-O'Connor's Guide to Jerusalem, 5th edition. Inscription honors Marcus Junius Maximus, legate of the Augustus, which implies that he was the governor of the province of Gia and legate of the 10th Legion Fratensis, and around the year 200. So what it indicates, it's a monument to someone that served in the army. Now, it wasn't necessarily found, this monument was not found in its original place, but you don't roll something like that too far. So it does indicate that the army base should have been in relatively short or close proximity to this area. We do have sources and later sources that talk about how the Roman army was in one of the towers, of the three of the towers that are that we know that Herod built around around the Jaffa Gate, and therefore from the late 19th century we have a number of different suggestions. We can see here Germain Doran in 1892 suggests that it's basically just the citadel was the army base. Wilson, you can see here, expands on almost all of the Armenian quarter and some of the Jewish quarter, going almost all the way down to the Jewish quarter. And we're going to see that's going to be an important idea there. And again, these are mostly based on just understanding of the topography understanding of what a Roman army base within an urban setting would look like in proportion to the other parts of the city and so on. You can see here Vincent and Abel, Vincent and Abel place it over here, very similar to Wilson, okay? And here we have Safrir, who limits it mostly to the, he first published 84, he repeats it again in 99. He limits it to the Armenian quarter. Okay, you can see that here. But some have said that we just don't find enough material here that would indicate it. Eilat Mazar excavates in this area around the Temple Mount, and she finds a Roman over here. I didn't find a good picture online, but there's a Roman bathhouse and there's a Roman bakery, and there are plenty of signs that it's built either for or with the materials of the 10th Legion. And so both Eilat Mazar and it's similar to this Guy Stiebel puts the army at have a garrison guarding the early camp here, but then they move basically to the area of Temple Mount, which both topographically and around this area, but that's just their suggestion might not be in common. You could still have both as the base, but that's you understand why she places it here, because if you're gonna have a bathhouse, you're not gonna walk all the way across the city to the bathhouse, but the bathhouse might be here because the water is coming in the aqueduct over here, but we'll discuss that a little bit more a little bit later. You can see here that Hillel Geva, and this is what appears in the new Encyclopedia of Archaeological Excavations in the Holy Land, and you can see here that he has, number one, extended the camp pretty much all the way down to the entire what we call today Mount Zion, okay, the Western Hill, but he does not have it enclosed completely with a wall. You see, he has a protective wall along this side, which could have been even the same wall that existed in the Second Temple period. Remember, the destruction of Jerusalem came, and the Roman entry to the city came from the north. This wall didn't have to be destroyed, so it might have been still somewhat intact, and they just used it and fixed it up and continued to use it. And maybe they didn't even need a wall on this side. Remember, it's the Roman Empire. You're in the middle of Jerusalem. What type of enemy do you have to worry about attacking the city at this time? So that could be part of, and we'll come back to this reconstruction of the city a little bit later. But Shlomit and Dan Bahat continue, more or less takes Safrir's addition, placing it in the Armenian quarter. But Shlomit Weksler-Bdolah finds a significant amount of material that relates to the 10th Legion, scattered all the way through this area. Now, does this mean that there has to be the 10th Legion there, or could it be that these are houses of either civilians or army personnel that are building houses outside of an area that are considered to be the camp? You know, the city itself might be considered to be like a canabai legiones, which is like the army settlement that surrounds an army base. And so it's not unlikely that if there is a pottery workshop which is making roof tiles, that somebody privately is going to be able to build it. But she finds a few other pieces of evidence that she puts together and tries to place the base somewhere else. This wall we've known for a long, long time. It's probably, some thought it was the Shar Ginat of the Second Temple period, the Genath Gate related to regarding the story of Jesus leaving the city. But others think this wall, which is not exactly the place of what we call the first wall, and Josephus describes, could be from the Roman period. And that would be, according to Shlomit, part of a wall that was surrounding the army base. She also says that during this time, both the street that she is, the street we're going to call the Western Cardo, which she excavates, which finds significant material that relates to the 10th Legion, and the reconstruction or the renovations of Wilson's Arch, and we're going to discuss the recent finds of that as well, but this entire brown here, all from the late Roman period, and therefore she would like to connect, not replace like Eilat and Guy Stiebel say, but connect the Roman army base to the 10th Legion base to Temple Mount, because Temple Mount both would have had, as we're going to discuss shortly, a important temple, and the army is going to either utilize the temple or want access to the temple. And so the way she reconstructs it is, here is this gate, here's the wall, a special wall that was built by the army to surround the base. And here we have the causeway, as she calls it, which carries the water into Temple Mount, but also can serve as a connector between Temple Mount, which has some type of, let's say, pseudo, both a pagan and a military purpose. There might have been, defending the city, and the base itself. So that would have been a secondary need for it. And you can see here in the map that she puts out in the book, you could see all these green dots are places where she finds accumulations of these either roof tiles or bread stamps or whatever it is that relates to the 10th Legion. And you can see here how she reconstructs. Similar to Geva, she includes Mount Zion. She continues here. She also found another piece of the wall that was found by other 19th century explorers in this place, and maybe she found a gate here. Again, I wouldn't say this is a straight line, but rather following the topography, the natural topography of this cliff, because it is a cliff overlooking the Tyropian Valley, European Valley, and then connect up over here with and not leaving the valley open, but having the viaduct or the causeway over here. And so this is where she tentatively, you can see she even writes that there, she would place the camp of the 10th Legion. Again, we're talking about a camp with urban setting. We do know that sometimes when an army, a military would occupy a city, they would take over a temple or a compound that pre-existing and not build their own buildings. But understand, this legion conquered the city in 70 and stayed in the city until the end of the 3rd century during the reign of Diocletian. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. Don Bahad plates it exactly in the year 298, but everyone else just says somewhere in the reign of Diocletian they moved to Eilat. So for 200 years the 10th Legion is in the city. So the suggestion that they did have the time to build a proper wall around their camp does make a lot of sense. And therefore, and it could have been in stages. Like, so we don't have, and this is something we could expect to find in the next 20 years of research, is maybe other pieces of this wall. Now that we know what to look for, we might go back and try to identify this wall here, because there are large sections of it should have been found if there were remains of it in Avigad's excavations over here. And even though we don't learn from things that don't exist, but Seligman also says that it just isn't there, and if there is no remains of a wall of the 10th Legion, it's hard to imagine that there were. So after all this said and done, and regarding the camp, and again, the camp could have expanded through the years. It could have started out as a small garrison near the Jaffa Gate and expanded and contracted. It's unclear exactly, but this is the limits of the city. What's going to be important about lists, and I think this is going to be very important when we go on to the next, is that if this is where the camp of the 10th Legion is, in the next chapter when we're going to open up of what Hadrian is now going to establish a city, he's not going to get rid of the camp of the 10th Legion. So basically what you're going to have to do is going to take the plan of a Roman city and fit it within the limitations, the significant limitations that Temple Mount and the Camp of the Tens Legion will leave you. And that will hopefully give us an explanation of how the urban landscape of the Aelia Capitolina is going to develop. And that's going to take us into the next chapter, Hadrian and the founding of Aelia Capitolina. So in Dio Cassius, he says the following: in Jerusalem, Hadrian founded a city in a place of the one which had been razed to the ground, naming it Aelia Capitolina, and on the site of the temple, the Jewish god, he raised a new temple to Jupiter. This brought a war of no slight importance, nor a brief duration, and that is, of course, the Bar Kokhba revolt. There is a little bit of, there was for up until relatively recently, somewhat of a debate, because Eusebius speaks of the opposite, that the founding of Aelia Capitolina came as a reaction to the Bar Kokhba revolt. However, it's quite clear, and we're going to see that it was not. But before we go into showing why we know now today the city was founded in the year 129 or 130, we can see here that the building of the temple Solomon built, this is the Bordeaux Pilgrim in 333, finds that there are two statues of Hadrian. Not far from the statues of stone, the Jews come every year, and they anoint it and lament with a groan and tear their garments. So a day before Tisha B'Av, it seems to be that during the Roman period, Jews were able to come somewhere on Temple Mount, and they would pour oil and weep on the Temple Mount. This is, some say that it was only on Mount Olives, but it seems from this text that it was actually on Temple Mount. What are these two statues of Hadrian? Not these. This, of course, is the very famous one in Tel Shalem, and one of the sources talks about a equestrian statue, Hadrian on a horse, but it could have been a mistake. We have an inscription that's upside down and on top of near what's known as the Holder Gates, near the double gate and the triple gate, and it says to Titus Aelius Hadrianus Antoninus Augustus Pius, the Father of the Holy Land. This is an inscription which talks about Antonius Pius, and there may have been a statue of Hadrian and a statue of Antoninus Pius, who also has Hadrian in his imperator name, and therefore imperial name, and therefore just confused that. But going back to Hadrian, we have one of his coins, and it says here, the colony Aelia Capitolina Condita. Condita means founded. Okay, is that Condita means the founding of the colonia, and this coin now. One of the things that one of the surprising things, or that Shlomit Weksler-Bdolah found in the excavations here, is that this street was from around the year 130, even before. She said some of the material indicates that it looks like even it's earlier, which is very interesting, because we do have a source that's going to come a little bit later that indicates that it could be even like around 120 that this city could have been established. And if we think about it, maybe it was possibly a reaction to the revolt of the diaspora, Pomos Shelkitos, as we know about. But there are a few other things that we have found. Now, there is an inscription that's not necessarily in situ here, but another inscription was found in work that was done outside of Damascus Gate, a very large inscription, partially damaged. But this inscription, which was found very recently, this was found in 2014, which we're not going to read now because it's only part of it, because the other part of this inscription is in the courtyard of the Franciscan Bible Museum. And putting the two together, the Imperator Caesar Hadrianus Augustus, that's Augustus, son of deified Trajanus Particus. Now, this is very interesting. His father, he deified. Trajanus Particus was actually one of the generals of the 10th Legion in Jerusalem, and participated in the I'm sorry, it's the father of Trajan. That is the grandson of the deified Nerva, high priest invested. Sorry, scratch that because we'll get it here. Invested with the tribunician power for the 14th time, consul for the 3rd time, father of the country, dedicated by the 10th legion Fratentis Antoniana. That's interesting because the 10th legion seemed to have gotten some type of a nickname. And that we saw also on the first inscription. In any case, this also gives us a year around the year 129, 130. And so we have an inscription. This is another inscription which we're going to discuss later. This is a reconstruction of Dan Bahat of Damascus Gate, which is also considered to be done by there, where he reads the decree of the decurions of Aelia Capitolina, which indicate that we have some type of DBC, is the decurions, which we associate with some type of civil leadership. One of the big questions we're going to have is who lived in Jerusalem. If it's not just the army veterans and some of the people related to the army, who's going to be living there? So what we understand here is that Hadrian, in the year 130, is going to establish a pagan city. Now, what's going to be in the pagan city? We have another amazing source. This is called the Chronicle Paschale, which the English edition doesn't help us because the common English, the translation of Whitby only takes us to the end of the 3rd to the 7th century. It's a Greek chronicle of all of world history. It goes back to Adam and Eve. It's like a Seder Olam in Greek. And whoever the writer, the author, is using all kinds of ancient sources. And most scholarship today, almost everyone, agrees that the information that is told about Jerusalem during this period, the time of Hadrian, is authentically from that time period. And what does it say? So now we're explaining what does Hadrian build in the city. Now, it could be these things took a few years to eventually build, but at least this is what is considered to be part of the city. And Hadrian built 2 demosia, theater, a tricameron, the tetraniphon, and the dodecaphion, which were formerly called the anabathmoi, and of course the quadra. Okay, what are these things? And he divided the city later, they say, into 7 quarters. We'll try to understand that. So the 2 demosia are public bathhouses. Maybe it's one of the maybe one that Eilat has found. A theater. They just found it where many of you might have known about it. We'll see that a little bit later. Maybe it's part of what it's being described here. We would think it's as small as an Odeon. Here it's related to as a theater. A tricameron is a 3-chambered room, which is very interesting because we know the Aelia Capitolina, Aelia is like the family name of Hadrian, and that is a tribute to Hadrian and Trajan. Capitolina relates to the Capitolini gods, Jupiter, Minerva, and Juno. And so if you have 3 gods, some of the temples that are built for them have 3 chambers, have 3 rooms in them, each one for the gods, each individual god. So this could be a reference to the temple that stood on Temple Mount. The Tetranymphaeon, which is a fountain which has 4 something, either 4 fountains, 4 gods, 4 something. It's unclear, 4 directions. We don't know what the 4 is responsible about. One of the structures that Shlomit Weksler-Bdolah finds along the street looks like a fountain. There isn't something that's special with 4 in it, but it could be that's what it's referring to. The next building has a number of, isn't really clear. The literary translation from the Greek means 12 gates, formerly called stairs. So some thought this referred to a step street that was later turned into a plaza. Maybe it's so each one there. Some have suggested this refers to Temple Mount. Some suggest it's referring to the area around Aphrodite Temple, which later is going to be the Church of Holy Sepulchre. Some, the most interesting though, Joseph Patrick suggests that the 12 gates relate, and the stairs relate, and he proves it in the whole article. You're welcome to see it. They relate to a circus, which means a hippodrome. Is that possible? Yes, but again, we don't have any. And the quadra, some type of an area that was called the quadra. Okay, so if we're trying to reconstruct the building, what do we have? We have the army base, which is centered on the Western Hill. We have the Hippicus Tower, which is used, or one of the towers, the one we assume is the one that's still standing today. Whoops. And then we have these new sections of the city, which are all built. And we'll come back to this, the Lean Rittmeyer's reconstruction later. Again, we don't assume that it was all built at once. But one of the things I think we can understand from what Hadrian did is that he basically put down the infrastructure of a pagan city all at once, meaning he just, in one go, within 10, 15 years, they had put tons of money into the city and built a whole set of streets, a set of temples and public buildings, all dedicated, of course, in an attempt to build a proper pagan city on the ruins of Jerusalem. Wilson's Arch has been a debated topic for many, many years. We know we found this structure, which is now identified as a theater, but if you, very recently, they just published in a journal, in the PLOS journal, Tehila Lieberman, who excavating here, they took organic material within the makeup of Wilson's Arch and were, according to their dating, which is, this came out in an article really, really recently. It got into some of the regular press. They dated to Herod. So it doesn't really affect us that much because we believe it still stood in the Roman period, but it does help us understand how the development of this city started to begin. So here our next chapter is going to take us into the triumphant arches, but before we look at the arches, let's look at the streets, and we'll look at the streets a little bit later also, is that we have Temple Mount as a given, and we have the camp, or it's not yet abandoned. This is a map that Shlomit's going to have for the later periods, but you can see what they try to do is put the gridded streets within the empty area. So you understand now the importance of the Western Cardo, because if this is going to be the Roman camp, you're not going to put any streets through here. So you try to do as best as you can the hippodamus structure of the gridded streets. But both you have to deal with the topography and you have to deal with the fact that you have this big Temple Mount and the Roman camp, and that's more or less how these roads were dictated. Now, how do we know that these roads were an attempt to build a Roman type of a city? Is if you look at the side of you look over here on this road, half of the street is cut into bedrock, meaning they built these straight roads with absolutely, and you can see the lines of topography here, the lines of altitude that you can understand. They just cut through the rock. They had a straight line. The engineer said, go, which meant that there was little interest in making these roads fit with the topography and with the natural landscape. And that was characteristic of the Roman cities that were built. But again, they had to take into consideration the fact that there was a Roman army camp here and a temple here. And that's sort of what dictated there. So you have more or less one of the neighborhoods here, one of the neighborhoods here, and leading down to over here, a southern gate. So within the city, now the city basically moves from being centered in, let's say, the Western Hill in the Second Temple period in Temple Mount to the northern areas, which were probably less populated in the Second Temple period, and now they're going to have they're going to be rebuilt. And we're all familiar with the arches, the first one being Ecce Homo. You can see that here in its when it was first discovered, when they were building the Christian buildings in the late 19th century. You can see what it looks like here, how it was integrated in the walls here, and how Dan Bahat reconstruct both Ecce Homo, the plaza, the forum, again, the people, and the pools underneath, the Strotion pools that we're all familiar with, and of course the arch that was found within the building of the Russian Alexander Nevsky's church, Nevsky, sorry. There are two other. Well, of course, we mentioned the Damascus gate, which was understood, at least at this point, to be a freestanding gate, not a not part of any type of a wall. No wall would have been built over here until a much later time period. And Dan Bahat has a third gate all the way out, a fourth gate out here. Shlomit doesn't mention it, but it was discovered, there were pieces of this, like an arch or a triumphant gate that's already around where we would place third wall built by Agrippa. So maybe they just were using some of that. In any case, we have here a reconstruction of the thing. So that's regarding the arches that you're now decorating this new city. We have the streets that are decorating this. We'll see those in a moment. But the main public buildings that we have, that we don't really have too much with regard archaeologically, but we do have in some of the other sources, which we're going to see here. We have, of course, we'll start with the Temple of Jupiter on Temple Mount. We don't know proper excavations have been conducted, but one of the things that Tzachi Dvira, and Gabi Barkai are telling us about the finds is that there's no indication that during the Roman or Byzantine periods we have a drop in human activity, and there still are coins, and there still are pottery and stuff like that coming from Temple Mount. So it might, our vision of Temple Mount being a garbage dump seems to be inaccurate. We're not clear exactly what the temple would have looked like. As I suggested before, there may have been 3 chambers inside. We don't really know how large it was. We know it seems to be from the traveler, the Pilgrim of Bordeaux, that there were these statues of Hadrian somewhere in the courtyard that were openly visible to everyone. But beyond that, we don't really know that much. This is, of course, the Temple of Jupiter in Rome. It didn't necessarily have to be this big. Now, how do we know there would have been a temple in Jerusalem? This is a coin of Aelia Capitolina, and here we have Jupiter, Minerva, and Juno. So we have, and there's if you look, there's a building. This is not the only coin that was minted in Jerusalem that has a picture of a temple. And one of the things that we normally say, it's very rare to have a deity and a temple that's on a minted coin that doesn't depict a building in that thing. This is what we have in Sipori, in Ashkelon, and many other cities that we know about temples that were particular deities that were there, and they're on the coin. So that's another indication that we have it. What's interesting, this is, of course, not what was in Jerusalem. This is the compound of Jupiter / Bel in Baalbek, or Baal. This was, what's very interesting about this is, as the neighbor Roman province, this was built up as a huge compound, not necessarily within a very large urban setting, but it was like a pilgrimage site. And this is going to be interesting because when we summarize the different, remember that when we summarize the pagan temples that were built in Jerusalem, because the other one, which we all should know about, is the Temple of Aphrodite, or Venus, because we're in the Roman period, that was built. This, of course, is Dan Bahat's reconstruction from his atlas. We have almost no archaeological evidence of what this would look like. This is only based on comparisons to other Roman temples and the size of the area in relationship to the temenos that would have been part of. These, of course, are the arches that are now integrated into the Alexander Nevsky and part of the the Cardo. Whether or not the Cardo would have looked like that during this time is unclear, but still, that's part of the thing. Now, the third temple that we have, that many of us have heard about, is the Roman temple of Asclepius or Serapis, which is in the compound of St. Anne. Also, we don't know exactly where it's exact. We know it was there, and we have some of the ruins from it. Here are other coins. Again, Aelia Capitolina. Okay, Colonia Aelia Capitolina. What you can see here, this is Serapis sitting down, and this is Serapis, which it's got his traditional like basket thing on his head. So this also indicates that there was definitely, it doesn't have a building, but there definitely is a compound, a pagan compound for the worship of Serapis, a very popular deity during that time, again associated with healing, just like Asclepius, and just like it's going to be in St. Mary's of the Probatica, it's in its next form in the next time period. There is a fourth temple, which here's an example of a Serapion, a temple to Serapis. Another temple which appears not just once but a few times on coins from Aelia Capitolina is this, and it's hard to see from here, but from the other coins, this is a Tyche or an Astarte, which is a female deity. Where was this just an open pagan rite? Was there another temple built? Could this be near, maybe near, we know there was some activity near Siloam Pool, maybe that had to do something with the thing. There is when I visited once with a group, and Shlomit was excavating, it must have been, I guess, 2007 or 8, whenever it was, she claimed that right next to, let's go all the way back here, I think I might have actually brought it here, right next to the, let's see if I have it, right next to the building, the facade building, which she identified as some type of, over here, that she identifies as some type of a water fountain, an nymphaeon. She found a facade of a very large building, which she thought could be a temple. So I suggest that it could be this Tyche temple. She didn't excavate enough to include it in her book or in her writing. She does hint to it, but there is a plan now basically to excavate everything underneath the Western Wall Plaza. That's the plan right now. So hope we may find another temple with the context of that in that area. So that is interesting there. Now, what's interesting about all of these temples, the 4 temples that were built here, is that one of the features of Roman temples in the East during this time period is there usually was an attempt of syncretism, that when you built a temple in Palmyra, or you built a Roman temple in one of these Eastern cities, is that you would associate the deity with the local deities. And you see that that is not the case of Jerusalem. What you see in the case of Jerusalem is the completely Latin, Roman worship. Again, things that existed also in the East. I mean, Serapis was famous from Egypt and from Alexandria, but these are the Roman versions of them. Now, is this because this might relate to who's they're for or what their purpose was? I think this is indicative, at least in the initial stages, when Hadrian puts it there, is again, this is part of his policy of erasing everything that was there before and starting a new pagan city of Aelia Capitolina. So there's no interest in integrating with the Jewish god that existed there before, and therefore there was no interest in putting it there, and therefore they didn't want to connect it to any of the other Eastern gods. The Tyche might be a little bit different, but one scholar suggests that this is this is not just a coincidence, but this is part of the Roman policies regarding Roman Jerusalem, which is interesting because it's going to relate to another thing we're going to say about the population when we come to the end. So we're going to try to piece all these different pieces together and come out with some type of a statement about the city at the end. But before that, let's get to the theater that was discovered by the different team: Alexander On, Avi Solomon, Joe, there's Avi, and Zenton, and all the different people that work down here, and Tila Lieberman. They found this beautiful, we would normally call an Odeon, but if it is the theater that's related to, again, from the Roman period, very close to Temple Mount, and not in a very good place to build the theater. But again, you don't have the luxury of building it anywhere. You're building it where you're building it where you have available space. And so that's, well, if it's in the valley, it's even a little bit easier to build it, as they probably use the ruins and the rocks to build it up over there. So that's just another feature, and if we had time to go on, but that stuff is published. You don't need me for that. Here we have the streets. Very many of the pavements that are us tour guides would like to say Jesus walked on them, or the tour guides that have been saying for about 900 years or more have been saying these are the streets of Jesus. They're probably mostly Roman. And that's one of the things that even Wilson was able to discover. Of course, the Stostros and what was found there, but even the street on Via Dolorosa and the Christian Quarter Street are probably all the from the Roman period, which is going to be also part of our summary, which we're going to basically what is happening is that the street system that is built by Hadrian, founding Aelia Capitolina, will form the infrastructure of streets until, in the old city of Jerusalem, until today. What's going to happen is after the camp is going to leave, they're just going to be able to extend those streets to the south. But otherwise, more or less, the gridded structure and the way it's developed are going to be exactly the same way. The division into the different quarters and so on are based on this Roman plan. So that's going to be an interesting outcome of our now new study. Now, so in the year 298, the Roman army picks up and moved under Diocletian. There is all kinds of strife going on with different with Zenobia and with other things. I'm not going to go into that now, but there are other reasons that the Roman army has to leave. Also, you don't need a Roman army inside of the city during, you need it on the border town. So the Roman army leaves, goes to Eilat Aqaba, around 298 is when Dan Bahat says, but most today say it's somewhere during the time of Diocletian, and that basically leaves a gaping hole in the city. What's going to be built? So it's not quite sure whether or not it's immediately following, but I would suggest immediately following people start to move into that area. They might have left behind some wealthy veterans. And what are the wealthy veterans, and probably the most wealthiest person in the city? That's what Yana has told us, was found by Doron Ben Ami and Yana Chechanovitz. They found a beautiful Roman peristyle building, probably a villa, so large it's hard to call it a private villa, but in the Givati parking lot from this time period, absolutely magnificent one that we didn't find it complete, but maybe it had like an opening towards the Kidron and the Hinnom valleys, which is a beautiful, beautiful view if it was actually like that, but it could have been just that it was completely enclosed, as many of the, let's say, the ones that we find a few centuries earlier in Pompeii. In any case, if we go back to what Safrir thought the city looked like, is that it was all quarries. Safir, Geva, Bahat all imagined this part of the city was quarries. And we do find Roman quarries done from this time period around what's known as the Tomb of David. We have Roman quarries in other places, but here we found a magnificent villa. And so what we can start to reconstruct is, number one, we have a relatively wealthy population in Jerusalem that have room to build beautiful villas because there's no real competition. There are not too many people there. But we have some of the finest artwork. I mean, here you have a head of a statuette that Yana is holding from that time period. They found, again, like a little, I don't have it here, but you might be familiar. They found like a Roman boxer in marble and so on. In addition to that, so we have there, so in this area now, instead of quarries, it now says residential quarter. Again, no wall around it, no need for a wall around it. It might not be the only, if it's, they might have had neighbors that we don't know of that also had nice houses from the Roman period. And now we have an abandoned camp that slowly but surely going to start getting filled up. But because there's abandoned camp there and it's an open area, it's going to allow the construction of large public buildings, namely the Church of Holy Sepulchre, which they want to build within the context of the urban area, and they're going to want to build it on top of a temple to get rid of the temple, and because we have and because they believe again that the Romans built their temple in order to erase the memory of where Jesus' tomb was. But then we have this whole area open for other buildings, the Nea Church, the Hagia Zion Church, the continuation of the Carter. That's not going to happen for a few generations, but it does. We now understand why there's an open areas for these large buildings, because this was an area that was now abandoned from the camp. Again, that's all depending on if those things. Now, what's happening outside of Jerusalem is also interesting. We have a number of sites in the vicinity of Jerusalem, which we have interesting finds from the Roman period, from the late Roman period. We have, of course, the famous Roman villa in Yael, same time period. Wealthy person, maybe a veteran, someone relating to the army, builds a beautiful villa near one of the springs there. Okay, so that we're all familiar with. A little bit farther down the valley, we have a beautiful fountain that was built called Ein Hania, built there. So if you don't know where it is, this is Ein Yael. If you continue down the valley towards Beitar, you get to Ein Hania. And it's beautiful, again, from the Roman period. Across the other side of Jerusalem, we found a Via Rustica, meaning we found another farmhouse from the Roman period. This one wasn't decorated with beautiful mosaics and frescoes and stuff like that. Very simple, but a large house that belonged to, again, this is probably from some Roman veteran that received a piece of land, was able to build his thing. Also, it didn't necessarily start immediately after the Roman army left, but it's toward the middle to the end of the 3rd century, maybe even a little bit earlier. Again, another feature of outside of Jerusalem that we should all be familiar with is the pottery factory, which was near what's today the Binyanei Hauma, excavated by our friends Goldfuss and Ben Yarubas. And what they found, as we know from the basement, is a series of ovens, industrial size. Therefore, it must have been something that was gave the army what to do. They were probably in charge. But if this is the case, then it had to have had such a large industrial complex needed justification for it, and they probably sold not just to Jerusalem but to all of the outlying villages that were around and the home farmers around. Now, regarding burial in Jerusalem during this time period, this was the topic of, or half of the topic of, Gidon Avni's doctoral thesis that came out in 1997. So he both. And he found, as you can see, the gray areas all around are part of the necropolis of the city, part of the cemeteries, and he came to a few very interesting conclusions. And this is also repeated by Shlomit in her book. Number one, very simple graves, no big dedications, mostly simple shaft tombs, a little bit of cremated remains, and so on. A few inscriptions here and there, just the names, nothing too grandiose. And just we have to compare that to what we find relatively nearby in another Roman city, let's say of Shechem, which we have beautiful, magnificent tombs. Similar things we also find in Caesarea. So what conclusion can we come from this, from the burial, is that we're talking about a relatively small civilian population, not necessarily a very wealthy one, probably military in style, some mostly of the military, which putting all that together, so who lived in Aelia Capitolina during this time period? In one place, Michaela Viona writes there was it grew to a beautiful and abundant Roman city. Maybe there were 80,000 people there. It sounds like almost Josephus in its talking, but in his article of the every single time period, I'm partially just talking about it because he passed away 2 weeks ago, Magen Broshi, who has a very famous article about the populations of Israel and Jerusalem during antiquity. He uses in every different time period a mikadem, a parameter of how many people per dunam in a populated area, and he's got his is standard that we've gone here and there at different time periods in different areas, but Broshi skips the late Roman period, doesn't even talk about it, because it seems it's for him, I think it's somewhat of an anomaly. He doesn't explain why. But Shlomit suggests, based on Hillel Geva, that we're talking around 4,000 people. We're talking a very low population. Again, this is in comparison to, let's say, 40, 50,000 during Second Temple period, if not more. And in the Byzantine period, going back to those numbers and maybe even exceeding them. So we're talking about a very limited population, basically just the people that serviced those large public buildings, people that serviced the army while the army was there, and a few other veterans that would have been there. Now, if they're veterans of the 10th Legion, very likely the 10th Legion would have been many Syrian troops. So we're talking about people that would feel comfortable living in this region and that were living there. But one of the things that if we put together now all the information that we have about the civilians of Jerusalem, that we'd not a very high number, not necessarily that there were, again, the public buildings were very glamorous, but that's not necessarily a very wealthy or important city, and regulated too. You know, these basically, they said 7 quarters, but basically to what we call today the Muslim quarter and the Christian quarter. That's more or less the entire city during the Roman period. A little bit, again, when the army leaves, it extends a little bit southward, but not inextensively because there are no real streets that were built. We have to compare to what else is going on during this time period. Jerusalem is not in a vacuum. Jerusalem is within a context. The main city during this time is, of course, the port city of Caesarea. Caesarea is the administrative capital. It's where, you have ships coming in and out all the time. There's Roman temple. Okay, there are other coastal cities that were also successful during this time. Ashkelon, Aza, probably Dor has a time period which is going back and becoming important during this time, and so on. So Jerusalem, which geographically never should have been important. It was only important because of its importance to the religious people that were looking for, the Jews and later the Christians, for the religious sites. During this time period, even though Hadrian wanted to erase Jerusalem's memory and build a Roman pagan city, which he did, wasn't successful in creating a large commercial and residential city because there really wasn't the proper infrastructure for it. So we do have other features of it, like these, villas and stuff like that, but it doesn't really we don't really have a proper Roman city, at least not when we compare it to Neapolis, to Caesarea, and to the other cities in the region. We shouldn't forget what's going on with the Jewish people during this time, and that is that after the Bar Kokhba revolt, the Jewish people were basically pushed up north and developed a renaissance of Jewish culture with the Mishnah and the Tanaim and the Moraim and all we have there. It's all going on when they can't come to Jerusalem. So Jerusalem, as much as it's an ir chareva bzuya legionot yoshvim ba, but a new Jerusalem, a Jerusalem shel Mala, is being developed, a spiritual Jerusalem, a legendary Jerusalem. The actual Jerusalem is not a very, it's a pagan city with very limited area, waiting for it to be turned into the Christian center, which it's going to be in its next period, and that really brings it to brings us full circle. So let's just go through and just what are our final statements about the time period of Aelia Capitolina. First of all, we have three clear time periods. Number one is 70 to 130, where the city is in ruins and there's an army base somewhere in the city. Second is the I would say the climax, the apex of the city of Aelia Capitolina during 130 to the end of the 3rd century, around 298, when both the army is there. We have large public buildings, but a very limited amount of residential growth and not that much importance commercially. So it is a small, it may have had people coming to see the temples, but it mostly was nothing compared to the period before or after. The army departs, and there is what was imagined is that basically the city falls apart. We don't see that happening. We see the city continuing, maybe even growing. And that growth basically just continues directly into the Byzantine period. And that might be why we don't really identify it, because it's very hard to draw the line from the early Byzantine to late Roman. And maybe some of the things that already started at the end after the Roman army leaves just picked up and continued when it was converted to Christianity. So the new ideas, where was army base? We have the clear about that it was clearly a Latin city, as much as the time period before was Aramaic and Greek, and afterwards was almost purely Greek. Almost all the inscriptions were in Latin, which is very interesting. It was a very Roman city in that regard, and the Romans dictated its language and its public things. Whether people actually all spoke Latin is unclear, but at least in the public sphere, everything was in Latin. Our final statement, which we said before, which was interesting here today, is how the street outlines, which again had to take into two things into consideration. One, the army base, Temple Mount, and the topography basically led to the development of the street patterns of Jerusalem for all generations. So this was not the most important time period in understanding Jerusalem, but very interesting things have been found in the last 20 years that have opened up our eyes to understanding this time period a lot better, and what will conclude with more or less what Shlomit concludes her book with, which is, I'm not completely convinced of everything, and let's continue digging because there's much more to find. So we should all enjoy it. We should have now Tisha B'Av in a rebuilt Jerusalem, and we have the luxury of going back and looking at it in all of its different time periods that we can appreciate each one for what it can teach us about the history of the city. Okay, that's all I have for now. I hope people enjoyed that. I would suggest, if you're interested, to look over Shlomit's book. It is available online for purchase at Brill, but if you're using the internet of a library that has a subscription with Brill, you can download it directly to your computer, as you can see here. Where is it? Here is share her book, which is quite all the different and there's much more information and things here. I hope I did justice to her findings, but we will. Unfortunately, a book that came out in February 2020 probably didn't get out too much. It isn't, by the way, in. I went to got Bensvi to go look for it. It wasn't there, and funny that I passed Shlomit Weksler-Bdolah walking into the library. That didn't help me much, but if you need a hard copy, it's there. But today, who needs a hard copy when you have all these PDFs? Okay, so if there are any comments or questions, happy to take right now. And everyone that is fasting should have a meaningful and easy fast. Make sure you're drinking today. And that's all. Now I see we still have some people here.
Okay, Asher, thank you very, very much. This is, again, very informational, very interesting, and gives us a good perspective of the layout of Yerushalayim, and, you know, it's good. It's good.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.